So guys, if white begins with a move like d4 or c4, that is the English opening, on knight to f3, then to counter such moves, there is a solid opening that each and every player must know. That is the king's Indian defense. Probably the grandmasters like Hikaru or Bobby Fischer, they love to play King's Indian defense, which is the King's Indian defense is very strong and aggressive. And if you watch this video till end, then you will be learning hidden ideas and best strategies in King's Indian defense. So basically, what's the King's Indian defense? So the King's Indian defense is just normal. Here we continue our move, knight to f6, g6, bishop to g7, and then we just castle. So this is the opening structure that is called the King's Indian defense. Now, one thing that you all must be careful is, what if white begins his move with e4? Then we must never move knight f6 because it would be creating a uncomfortable position. Because now you are going to just protect your knight here and there. So basically, what I want to say is that except for knight to f6, there are many other moves like playing d6, the perk defense, or e5, or Karukan defense, or e6, or the Skillian defense. The main opening is the Skillian defense. Basically, nowadays many of the players play Skillian defense as the best opening. So here, if white begins with the move d4, we are going to play knight to f6, white plays c4, then we play g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, then e4. So the main idea is to just push the pawn and to create the attack over the knight, as well as to create a control over the center. Because this pawn has already been placed to take the control over the center, so there would be no problem in pushing this pawn. So to play against it, we can play d6. And nowadays, many players what they do, they just castle and they didn't care of this place. So it's always better to play d6 first, and then we should castle. So here we begin with the classical move as white, that is knight to f3. So here we castle. This is the opening for black, which is called the King's Indian defense. Coming back to our position, here white continues its move, knight to f3. We just castle, white begins the move, bishop to e2. So the main importance comes to just castle later on. Or if you review games of Hikaru, Bobby Fischer, you would be observing that they just create a clash on the center by playing e5. I would be telling you the importance as well. Many of the players just push this pawn and create a block position. But let us discuss of capturing. So if white captures, then he also captures. Now, many of you would be thinking that knight can capture this pawn and it's a free pawn. No. If white captures it, then we can also capture this pawn. Now, if knight captures it, then we win the knight, which is probably the equal position that we all got. Or if white captures, before capturing, basically you can observe the common move that white would be playing is capturing queen. Then we capture and then it tries its best to capture again. So here in this way also we can again capture this. Knight captures and we also capture. This is the same position that we all got. Coming back to our position. Here, after we have captured the queen, now except for capturing the pawn, What if white begins the move bishop to g5, pinning the knight? And this means that we cannot capture this pawn. Later on, as we did to create the attack over the knight if knight takes this. Right? So, bishop, so this knight becomes of no use. So, in this case, don't worry, you can just play rook to e8. And if you won't play rook to e8, then you may be observing that white would be playing knight to d5 and create the attack over the knight at f6, as well as the attack over the pawn. Coming back to our position, here, except for playing e5 in a stand, we can play knight to a6 first. So white begins with castling. Now we can play e5. I will be telling you the importance of knight to a6. Basically, you can observe that we are just controlling this pawn. Now you just keep this thing in your mind. I will be telling you. Here, if white captures it, we also capture. Then, white has a bit tricky idea to first exchange the queen. So here, we also take the queen. Now white plays bishop to g5. Don't worry, just push it back. So here we play x6. Now white came to know that if it plays the bishop back, then we would be pushing the pawn, so it just takes the knight. Here we also take the bishop. Now white plays knight to d5. Now the thing is that you don't need to be worried of this pawn because this pawn is already protected, and you can just play king to g7, which is the best move, even according to computer analysis. Or you can play bishop back. But as a best move, if I have to show you, then it is a best move. And many of the players must play king to g7. Because think of the structure. It has already protected the king. Coming back to our position, we discussed of capturing. But what if white doesn't captures and begins with the move pawn to d5? So here, don't worry, we can just play knight to c5. Because knight to c5, the importance is that we are creating the attack over the pawn that many of you can observe clearly. And if white tries to push the pawn b4 to create the attack over the knight, not to create the attack over the knight, but to create the attack over the queen side. Because in king's Indian defense, you may observe that many players from the black side, they would be trying their best to attack over the king side. And many of the players from the white side would be trying their best to attack over the queen side. So it's always important to look for the attacks on the queen side. So here we play knight to c5. If white plays b4, then we will be capturing this pawn. But except for b4, we would be observing that white would be playing queen to c2 in order to prevent this attack. So here, now we have got the idea of b4. So why won't we defend it? So here we are going to play a5 just to defend it. So now white plays a3 to again push this pawn. Here we are going to play a4. The importance is that if white plays b4, then there is n percent. If you don't know the structure of n percent, how n percent works, then you can ask me in the comment section. I will be making separate video regarding the same. Coming back to our position, here, except for playing moves like a3 or b4, what if white plays bishop to e3, creating the attack over the knight? Now, simply observe that these squares are the light squares, right? So, the light square bishop is very important for the safety of those squares. So, it's our advantage that if white tries to exchange that knight, then it's our advantage. So, it's better to play b6, and if white takes it, then we can also capture it. Now, again, you can observe that this is the solid opening because white cannot try to play something like b4 or a3 because you have created such a difficult opening against it. Even you can think on white's behalf. How can you defeat such a kind of playing? Now let's look for the second variation. We all discussed about bishop to e3. But what if white takes bishop to g5? So in such cases, don't worry, just push the bishop back. So here we are going to play x6. The second advantage is that we can place our king to x7 as a safe position for king. Here white plays bishop to e3, creating the attack over the knight. Here we can repeat the same activity by playing b6. Now if white captures it, then we also capture it. This is the same variation that we are also playing. We can again. Alright, so let's look for another game. Here white begins with d4, knight to f6, c4, g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, e4, d6. Now, as we discussed about knight to f3, here white is going to play something else, that is bishop to e2. So here we are just beginning with our opening that we have studied. So here we continue with castling. White begins with bishop to g5. Now in such cases we are just beginning with our opening by knight to a6. Black. Now we have another chance to create a control over the center, that is e5. If white takes, then we are also capturing. Then queen takes queen, rook takes queen. Now knight to d5. So in these cases, you can observe that knight is creating the attack over the knight as well as the pawn. And this pawn is protected by the knight. So we don't need to worry of this pawn. So here we are going to play rook to d6. Protect. And in other ways, you are creating the attack over the e4 pawn. You can play c6 to create the attack over the knight. Or you can play x6 to create the attack over the bishop. Now what if white doesn't take the pawn? So it simply moves d5. Here we are just beginning with our move knight to c5. Now white doesn't move knight to f3. Instead it moves f3. So the basic idea is to push the pawns and to create the attack over the king side. And the other threat is that white can play b4 and can create the attack over the knight. So here we are going to play a5 as a best move. Here white begins with g4. We will be playing x6, creating the attack over the bishop. Now white becomes greedy and it takes the pawn. Then instead of taking it, we are going to begin with a stunning move, that is knight cross e4. If pawn takes it, then queen x4 check, creating the attack over the bishop. King goes to d1. Now we are gaining the bishop. This is now except for knight to f3 or bishop to e2, here white is going to play f4, also called a 4-pawn attack. Don't worry, just begin with castling. White plays knight to f3. Now we are going to play c5, creating the clash on the center. Here white plays d5. We are going to play e6, bishop to e2, having a space to castle. Now we are going to capture the pawn, capture, bishop to g4, having a space for knight to develop and to create the attack over the knight. Not only to create the attack, but to have a development of bishop. That's a good point for black. White castles. Now white plays x3, creating the attack over the bishop. Now if we place bishop back, then there is the move g4, creating the attack over the bishop. So except for taking it back, we capture the knight. Bishop captures bishop. Now, the amazing threat is that white could play e5, creating the attack over the knight, also at the pawn. So we are going to play rook to e8. Now white plays rook to e1 for to push this pawn. Although we have a knight, so we don't need to worry about such cases. So here we are going to play a6, generally to push the pawn and to push over the pawn till b4 to create attack over the knight. So here white gets our plan and plays a4. Now in this cases we can play c4, then we can place our knight to c5, and then we can place our knight to b3, creating the attack over the rook. Or we can place our knight over d3 on d squares, which could be a benefit for us because we are going to attack over the queen side. We can also place our queen over b6 for pushing the pawn and to give a check, which could be our benefit. Alright, so here now we all studied about e4. Now we begin with a classical variation, that is g3. That is bishop to g2, take the knight to f3 and to castle, which is the same equal position as like how we are going to play. Now here we begin with castling. White plays bishop g2, we play d6, knight f3. Now we are going to play except for c5, although c5 is a very nice move. But here we are going to play knight to c6, letting white to play e5. If white plays d5, although it would be creating the attack over the knight, yet there is a strong move, knight to a5, creating the attack over the, not only the attack, but to create the pressure on the c4 pawn. So here white plays queen to d3. Now we are going to play c5. Now if it to n percent, then it's our advantage because look at the center. We have the pawns. We can push those pawns and can create a control over the center. And white have lost the control over the center. So you would be observing that white wouldn't to n percent. And except for that, if white tries to play a3, then it's a kind of uh, mistake because we can play knight to b3, creating the attack over the rook. Or we can play a6, then b5, creating the attack over the queen side. And alright, so this is the position that you all have to solve. Try to think of what we can do in this position and share your answers in the comment section.